In this video, I will explain different types of processes. You might have noted that whenever you go to a different place, you go to a Walmart, you see a different type of layout. So for instance, in Walmart, you will see all their meat and dairy section is more on periphery along the walls, and some items are in the center. And once you are done with picking up your items, then you go to the register, and there is a queue, and you get in the queue and wait for your turn. So that's one type of layout. If you go to a hospital, you see another type of layout whereby a doctor or a dentist would be examining only one patient at a time. Once you are in a class at university, then it's an entirely different type of layout. There are about 30 students and one professor. And so in this way, there are different types of processes and different types of layouts. And we want to see that what are those different types of layouts. So in general, there are four, and we also add a fifth one, but the general four one are, the first one is job shop, and the next is batch, and then repetitive and continuous. So I will start with job shop. So job shop is basically a type of layout in which service is being offered to only one unit at a time. Let me start with an example. So for instance, let's say when you go to a mechanic to get your car fixed. So what happens there? A mechanic will be fixing your car. A mechanic will be fixing only your car at one time. A mechanic cannot work on multiple cars. Similarly, in a hospital, uh, here you can see that doctors are operating and they are doing surgery. And of course, they can do surgery of only one patient at a time. So only one unit is under consideration. So a car mechanic is an example of a job shop whereby only one car is being fixed. A hospital is also an example of a job shop where only one patient is being treated. You go to a dentist, again, that is a job shop because a dentist is only dealing with one patient at a time. Similarly, if you go to a barber for a haircut, and that's also a job shop because a barber is only dealing with only one customer at a time. So these are examples of job shop. Now, in this case, there are some characteristics of this one. And uh, the characteristics are that, first of all, because service is being offered to only one customer at a time. So therefore, it tends to be slow. And also because there are customized type of services, so they can also be expensive. I mean, especially just imagine that in a hospital, if you don't have insurance, then how expensive they could be. Then the next example is batch production. So batch production is a type of process in which multiple units are being produced at a time. And one of the best example for a batch shop is a bakery. So for instance, let's say in a bakery, what happens? Um, in a bakery, a baker is producing a relatively large number. So for instance, they will be producing a batch of croissants, maybe some cupcake, uh, cheesecake, or any type of thing. So there will be a large batch. So for instance, let's say if they are preparing croissants, maybe 100 at a time. And once they are done, then they will move to another item, a cheesecake. Again, they might be making 100 units. And once they are done with that, then they will move to another item. And again, that item might be 50 or 100 or more than that units at a time. So that's called as batch production. Pharmaceuticals also have the same model, whereby whenever they produce something, it's produced in batches. So when they are producing tablets, there's a there's a batch of tablets, and once they're done, then they will move to a batch of injections, and after that a batch of ointments, etc. So as you can see that one of the characteristics of batch production is that volume is relatively high. Now compare it against job shop. In job shop, there was only one customer being processed at a time. But in job shop, in batch production, volume is relatively large. So for instance, 100 croissants, 100 cheesecakes, 100,000 tablets, 10,000 injections, all being produced at one time. Then the next type of process is called as repetitive. So for instance, one best example of repetitive is assembly line, assembly line of Harley Davidson or maybe of any car. Now, in this case, what happens? For example, the assembly line is such that um, in the beginning of the assembly line, there is just a structure, outer structure of the car, and it's like a belt, a conveyor belt. When it is moving on, every person is adding their part. So one person will be fitting engine, the next one might be fitting transmission, and the next one is installing seats, and the next one is fitting doors. So as the product is moving, everyone is doing their part, they are adding their part. And the thing is that a person who is fitting engine is only doing one thing. He's only installing engine. And when he's done, then the car will move to the next person. And similarly, a person who is fitting door in the car is only fitting door. He has nothing to do with transmission installation or seats installation or tires installation. So for this purpose, it's called as a repetitive, which means a person is doing only one type of job again and again, over and over on different products. And for this reason, it's called as repetitive. And some other features of this is that because volume would be high relatively, because a person is only doing job on one thing, and they would receive next unit and third unit, fourth unit, fifth unit. So therefore, speed is relatively high. And as you can see, you can imagine when any automobile manufacturing plant, every day they produce hundreds of cars, every day, hundreds of cars. So this is called as a repetitive. Another characteristics of a repetitive is that the spectrum of skills is relatively low. For instance, a person who is fitting doors is only fitting doors. So they are not a manufacturing engine, or they are not working in design department. And the last one is called as continuous. A continuous process is the one of the best example of continuous is that, for instance, oil refinery. Now, let me give you an example of oil refinery, how oil refineries work. Now, oil refineries, produce a lot of oil. Um, they produce several tons of barrels of oil every week, and they they are working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they usually stop only for maintenance. So the output, the volume is very, very high. And for that reason, these refineries, they have to work non-stop. And the thing is that these refineries, for example, an oil refinery can only do one thing. It can only produce oil and some petroleum products. It does not have much flexibility. Now, compared with job shop, in a job shop, for instance, at one place, um, someone is operating on at one place, they are doing heart operation. Maybe at another time, they might be doing brain surgery or pulmonary treatment. But these oil refineries, their operations are very much standardized, and they are standardized because they are meant to produce large volume. And it's not just oil refinery, but many other operations as well. For instance, let's say if there's water desalination plant, whereby, let's say, water is being collected from sea, from ocean, and salt is being removed from that. Now, that plant also has to work non-stop, and you can imagine that the volume of water that's being produced is also huge. Similarly, another example is fertilizer plants, the plants that make fertilizer. So what they do is that they get nitrogen from atmosphere, and they mix it with hydrogen to make ammonia, and then ammonia is mixed with carbon dioxide to produce urea. That's a fertilizer. And again, they have to work non-stop. So these continuous production processes, they are very expensive. Um, they are they comprise very huge facility, and they have standardized products, standardized processes, and they cannot afford um, to halt their operations even for a day. So these are some examples, four examples. Now let's see what are their characteristics, or if there are some pros and cons, advantages, disadvantages. The first one is job shop, and its description is that customized goods or services. A barber can do many things for you. A barber can, for instance, do haircut. They can also do shave. Um, they can apply hair color, and they can do many type of services. And the advantage is that they're able to handle a wide variety of work. And disadvantage is that it's slow because they're only dealing with one customer at a time. Cost is relatively high, and it also requires complex planning and scheduling. Many times you have to develop an app. I mean, if you want to get an appointment, um, sometimes it's very difficult to get an appointment. Then in batch is semi-standardized goods or services. Flexibility, it's easy to add or change product or services, and cost is moderate cost per unit. And when we go to repetitive, then as you can see, as we are moving from job shop to batch to repetitive, then volume is increasing. Then, and standardization is also increasing. In job shop, there is no standardization. Every customer is a unique customer. Every customer wants something different. So standardization is not possible in job shop, but in repetitive or assembly type of layout, standardization is needed to increase the speed. So unit cost is also reduced accordingly because of standardization, and flexibility is low. And the last one is continuous. And as you can see that continuous is one extreme, which means for instance, we know that in job shop, there is no customization at all. There was, sorry, there was no standardization at all. But in continuous, there is high standardization, which means the same product is usually made in large volume. They are very efficient, and they have to be efficient because they are competing for cost, and they're very rigid, which means, for instance, an oil refinery can only produce oil. It cannot make dairy products. It cannot make steel. It cannot make cement. It can only produce oil. So these processes in continuous, they are very rigid. Now, here is another matrix that tells how do these processes fit when we compare them for volume and variety. So here in the top row, you see there's variety, and here on the left column, there is about volume. So here's very low or very low volume, moderate volume, high volume, and very high volume. And here is variety. And we want to see that on this spectrum, in this matrix, where we compare volume and variety, where do different processes fit in? So a job shop, we know that for a job shop, volume is very low. And the reason is that because, uh, for instance, in case of barber, in case of a car mechanic, um, so volume is very low because they are dealing with only one customer or one unit at a time. Then variety, high variety is possible. For instance, let's say if I give example of a car mechanic, they have to deal with a number of things. Sometimes they have to deal with uh, engine oil leakage. Sometimes they have to change engine oil. Someone comes for brakes problem. Someone comes from a different type of problem. So there is a multitude of problem, and they are dealing with it. So volume is very low, but variety is very high, and this is called as a job shop. Then when we go to moderate variety or batch production, and we know that in batch production, for instance, let's say in a bakery or any type of place, it could be a classroom or a pharmaceutical company, um, volume is relatively high compared to job shop. And variety is also possible. For instance, in a bakery, they make tens of items. And then the next one is repetitive. In repetitive, we know that volume is relatively high. For instance, a, mo a motorcycle or an automobile manufacturing company makes large number of cars, and variety is relatively low because when they are making one type of car, they're just doing it unless they're once they are finished, and they will wrap it up and they will set up another assembly line. But in general, variety is very low. And even if you have different types of cars, still uh, the variety is relatively low because different type of cars, no matter you are making an SUV, you are making a car, a sedan, a hatchback, they tend to have similar type of design, which mean if they are going to install doors, it's a similar type of task when a door is to be fit on an SUV or hatchback or sedan. And the last one is continuous flow. In continuous flow, volume is very high. Consider the amount of oil production on daily basis. It is huge. And the thing is that variety is relatively low because, for instance, when an oil refinery is producing oil, that oil refinery can only do that thing. It cannot be subjected to water purification. So these are four types of processes. And as you can see that the type of process that we select, it depends upon what are the characteristics of a process, and also what type of resources are available. And the last one is a project. A project is basically does not usually fit in this matrix. So we usually discuss it separately. It says a project is a non-repetitive set of activities directed towards a unique goal within a limited time frame. So for instance, you want to build a house, uh, that could be a good project. And there's a time frame, and you have to finish everything within that time frame and different types of activities, and you have a specific goal.